How politics crept into the church. What if the greatest threat to early Christianity wasn't the Roman sword, but the Roman embrace? For its first 300 years, the Christian faith was a religion of outsiders. Its members were a minority, often misunderstood, and sometimes brutally persecuted. For one big reason: they refused to worship the emperor. Their kingdom, they insisted, wasn't of this world. But history has a funny way of flipping the script. This is the story of how a faith that started on the very edge of the empire became the most powerful political force in the Western world. It's about how the church's relationship with government was forged in the fire of a collapsing empire and the ambitions of kings. So how did it happen? And more importantly, what was lost and gained along the way? A world apart. Being a Christian in the first few centuries meant you were on the outside looking in. The Roman Empire was a world of many gods, and Roman stability was believed to rest on keeping them all happy. So when Christians showed up talking about one God and a king named Jesus, they were seen as suspicious, even a little treasonous. Their refusal to burn incense to the emperor, a basic gesture of civic loyalty, wasn't seen as religious conviction, but political defiance. And that defiance led to periods of horrifying persecution, from the localized brutality under Emperor Nero, who famously scapegoated Christians for the Great Fire of Rome, to the empire-wide purges under Diocletian in the early 300s. The message from the state was crystal clear: conform or die. This constant threat created a powerful identity. The church saw itself as a spiritual kingdom, fundamentally separate from the political machine of Rome. Its authority came from God, not Caesar. Christians believed they were waiting for a heavenly kingdom, not trying to build an earthly one. They were pilgrims just passing through. Their relationship with politics was simple. Politics was the thing trying to kill them. But as the 3rd century dragged on, the Roman Empire itself began to crack. Decades of civil war, economic collapse, and invasions left the empire weak and fractured. It was a crisis that would set the stage for one of the biggest turning points in world history. The turning point: Constantine and the cross.
Please do well to like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't, as an encouragement for more of this kind of content.
The year is 312 AD. The Roman Empire is split between rival emperors, and a general named Constantine is marching on Rome to claim the top spot. The story goes that on the eve of a make-or-break battle, he saw a vision in the sky, a cross of light, and with it, a promise of victory. He ordered his soldiers to paint the Christian symbol on their shields, and against all odds, he won. Now, historians still argue about whether Constantine's conversion was a true spiritual awakening or a brilliant political move. But what happened next is undeniable. In 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan. This decree didn't make Christianity the state religion, not yet, but it did something revolutionary. It made being a Christian legal. For the first time ever, the church wasn't just tolerated, it was protected by the Roman state. The persecution stopped. Property that had been seized was returned. All of a sudden, being a Christian wasn't a liability anymore. In fact, it was quickly becoming an advantage. Constantine started pouring imperial money into building gorgeous churches. He gave bishops legal powers and a status that was once just for pagan priests, even letting them act as judges in civil cases. The faith that had been public enemy number one was now the state's favorite partner. The embrace had begun. The New World Order, the Church, and the Empire. This new partnership would change everything. By 325 AD, the church was in the middle of a huge internal fight over the nature of Christ, a debate known as the Arian controversy. Constantine saw this theological squabble as a threat, not just to the church, but to the unity of his empire. So he did something no emperor had ever done. He called a council of bishops to settle a religious argument. This meeting, the Council of Nicaea, was a game changer. Think about the scene: the Roman emperor dressed in purple and gold, overseeing a debate about Christian doctrine. He wasn't a bishop, he wasn't even baptized yet, but he used his political muscle to push for a single, unified creed. The goal was as political as it was religious. A united church would help him build a united empire. For the first time, raw political power was used to define Christian orthodoxy. The line between church and state was getting very blurry. The final step came about 50 years later. In 380 AD, Emperor Theodosius I issued the Edict of Thessalonica. This went way beyond Constantine's policy of mere toleration. It made Nicene Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire. Every other version of Christianity was now officially a heresy, and the old pagan traditions were formally condemned, starting them on the road to being outlawed completely. The persecuted faith had become the persecuting power. The merger was complete. The church now had the full might of the state behind it, and the state had the divine blessing of the church to justify its rule. The legacy of power. This new model of a church-state partnership would actually outlive the empire that created it. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in 476 AD, it left a massive power vacuum. And who stepped into the void? The one institution that still had structure, money, and a network that stretched across the continent. The church basically became the new governors of cities. The church preserved literacy, law, and what little order was left. As new Germanic kingdoms rose from Rome's ashes, their rulers quickly saw the upside of this alliance. When the Frankish king Clovis converted to Catholicism around 496 AD, he didn't just unite his people under one faith. He got the powerful and influential bishops on his side.
This trend hit its peak on Christmas Day, 800 AD. In Rome, Pope Leo III placed a crown on the head of Europe's greatest ruler, the Frankish king Charlemagne, and named him Holy Roman Emperor. You can't overstate the symbolism here. A spiritual leader was now in the business of creating emperors, and the emperor's power was now sealed by God through the church. This act cemented an idea that would define Europe for 1,000 years, that spiritual and political power were two sides of the same coin. Cracks in the foundation. But this marriage of power wasn't a fairy tale. It came at a huge cost. Where there's immense political influence and wealth, corruption is never far behind. The papacy itself often became a prize for powerful Roman families to fight over. And as European kings got stronger, they started clashing with popes over who was really in charge. This tension finally exploded during the Western Schism, starting in 1378. After a messy papal election, Europe was split between 2 and eventually 3 different men, all claiming to be the one true pope. This wasn't a theological argument, it was a raw political power struggle. The King of France backed the Pope in Avignon, England and the Holy Roman Emperor backed the Pope in Rome. For almost 40 years, the Church was ripped apart by the very political games it had learned to play, leaving millions of believers confused and damaging the institution's authority. The Reformation in the 16th century shattered the old model for good. Thinkers like Martin Luther argued for a two kingdoms doctrine, trying to draw a clearer line between the Church's spiritual world and the state's political one. But in some places, like England, the merger just got stronger. King Henry VIII broke with Rome and simply declared himself the head of the new Church of England, wrapping religious and national identity into one package under the crown. The old Roman model of a state church just put on new national uniforms. A changed world and modern echoes. The journey from a persecuted sect hiding in the catacombs to an institution that crowned emperors is one of history's wildest transformations. The embrace of politics gave the church safety, influence, and the power to shape Western civilization. But that same embrace led to corruption, brutal divisions, and wars fought in the name of God. And that complex legacy is still very much with us. The American experiment, with its constitutional wall of separation between church and state, was a direct reaction to centuries of European religious conflict. Founders like Jefferson and Madison argued that to keep faith genuine, you had to protect it from the corrupting influence of government. Yet even today, that line remains blurry. Fierce debates over religion's role in public life and the rise of political movements that fuse faith with national identity show that the temptation to merge the two is as strong as it ever was. The story of how politics crept into the church isn't just ancient history. It's a living story about power, faith, and the timeless struggle to balance the kingdom of God with the kingdoms of this world. If you found this exploration of history compelling, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the forces that shaped our world. And let us know in the comments, what part of this story do you find most relevant today? Thanks for watching.